Hello everybody, welcome to season 20 of Jan's opening clinic. That's right, I'm gonna keep calling it season. We just got a fresh crop of questions. So without further ado, let's delve right into it. This will be, like, I don't know, this another 4 or 5 shows to go through all the questions. And then we shall rinse and repeat. By the way, if you're watching this today, which is June the 21st, you might still be in time to get in a question for later shows. Check the chess24.com/read/news something. Find the news article, opening clinic 20, and ask me a wise question if you happen to be Chess24 Premium. Alright, let's do this. Galactic is saying, "Hi Jan, I like this new format, great improvement. And the old format was great already, so with a great improvement." Like, we must be. Okay, that's not what he's saying. He's saying, "So I want to play the exchange Slav with white because it's a good investment since I can play it against Slav, semi-Slav, and even Stonewall. What line do you recommend me to play? Concretely, with or without a quick knight f3, and so on. Thank you." Wow, he's making me talk about one of my favorite topics early on, the exchange Slav, an opening that I have played, some might say, more than it should be played. I'm not one of those people. I've long held the belief that it's a reasonably decent opening and it's a decent enough alternative to other lines in this Slav. It will probably gain some popularity now that Wesley So won a game against Magnus Carlsen with it. After c4, c6, the big question, or the first big question is already, do we exchange here immediately? Or do we go for knight f3, let's say knight f3, knight f6 first, and then take? Obviously, if we go for knight f3, knight f6 first, we can no longer play systems without knight to f3. Now, most exchange Slav fanatics will tell you it's better to go cd, cd, and then delay knight to f3 a little bit. I'm not sure it matters that much. First, here we have to be a little cautious with the move order because knight c3 might allow systems with e5, either e5 immediately or knight c6, bishop f4, e5, which are, as far as I know, not terrible. So nowadays I think if they want to do this, they will go for bishop f4, and then after knight c6 go e3, knight f6, knight c3. Which brings us one of the two big starting positions. The other would be with knight f3 included, so whenever knight to f3, knight c6, knight c3, knight f6, bishop f4. And the question, which one should play with white and which one's better, it's not so easy to answer. I believe they're rather similar because I've always considered systems with bishop f5 to be black's most reliable bet. And if black goes for bishop to f5, we often get reasonably similar positions. Like here, how do I do this? cd, cd, bishop f4, knight c6, e3, knight f6, knight c3, bishop to f5. Without knight to f3, I don't think white has a better move than knight to f3, really. Like, you could try starting with rook c1, and there is some followers for queen to b3, like lines like this, but I've never liked them. Queen c2 or queen d1 or bishop b5, I think there's not much here. So I would go knight to f3 here anyway, when after e6 we are back in the main line. And this is the position where white has to have some sort of idea if you want to play the exchange Slav successfully, or, well, if you want to play it at all. Bishop d3 is not really very challenging, neither is bishop b5. So there really only leaves queen b3 targeting this pawn. And after bishop b4, here white has to decide what he wants to do. I've fooled around with this line, which most people know nowadays, and it's therefore probably not a big surprise. Both bc and knight to g4 are supposed to equalize here. So if you don't have a lot of surprise value with that, you can maybe consider the move knight e5. That's more fresh, up and coming. And yeah, I guess this is a decent ground for research. Knight e5, I believe black's best move is bishop c3, bc. How does this go? Knight e5, bishop e5, castles. I believe you could leave this pawn hanging. And here it begins. So I'm not sure why there's an advantage, but this knight to e5 move did seem like a more interesting option than bishop b5 nowadays. So, since I believe that the main lines more or less transpose to each other, I'm normally team go knight f3 early and go for this position, because if black plays with a6, both against e3 and against knight f3, I always thought this has to be decent for white a6. It's important not to go e3, bishop g4 here. So we go rook c1 in order to meet bishop g4 with knight to e5. The main line is something like bishop f5, e3. And this is the game, amongst others. So Carlsen from recently, where are rook c8, bishop e2. It's not much, but white seems to be getting a little play after e6 castles, either knight to d7 or bishop d6 you take. What do you do? Quit knight a4, followed by knight c5. That kind of business. It always did seem to be, yeah, playable. Not claiming much, but after a6, with these small weaknesses on the light squares, on the dark squares on the queen side, I think white gets a reasonable game. Same after knight to d7, which was played in the Carlsen game. Yeah, of course, there are some finer points. You could argue that with the knight on f3 here after a6, bishop f4, there's a line like knight to h5, which is not terrible. Oh, hang on. Which is not legal either. So rook c1, knight to h5. This is playable, and maybe against some opponents it's worth avoiding that. Therefore you start with this. And here, if they go a6, once again, we don't want to go knight f3, bishop g4. So here we would probably play rook c1. When bishop f5, I guess, is the best move. Knight to f3. We're back to the same position we just saw. So, long story short, I don't think it matters so much with which move order. If you start with cd, I guess you want to go for a very early bishop f4. I normally don't bother and only play it after knight f3, knight f6. But since you mentioned that you also want to use it against, what was it? Semi-Slav and so on and so forth. This move order, cd, cd, knight f3, then knight c3, then bishop f4, then e3. I believe it's rather playable. But of course the exchange Slav, it doesn't promise you an advantage. Then again, neither does any other opening. I shouldn't say that. There's some openings that give you an advantage. Any other line against, the main line against the Slav that I'm aware of. So best of luck, Galactic, in your exchanging endeavors. I don't know what endeavors means, but it sounds like a smart word. Feedemaster Formless, he's saying, Dear Jan, what is the best way for white to gain an advantage after these moves in some order? c4, g6, g3, bishop g7, bishop g2, d6, knight c3, knight f6, knight f3, castles, castles, c5, d4, knight c6. Regards, Formless. That is his real name. Signing it with Formless. Who would have thought? On his answer, I don't know. I've asked myself the same question for a while now. Why does no one play this with black? I'm not sure which move order we had to get there. I'll try to put it on the board. So, yeah, I think Formless gave this move order, but you can also get it via a more standard King's Indian move order. And I've never fully understood why people don't play this. Knight c3, knight c6 business. My best guess is that there's too much ground to cover with black, and especially King's Indian players, they are normally not happy with these symmetrical positions after dc5, dc5. But from an opening advantage perspective, I don't really know what to do here. Like, I've looked at this stuff in the past. I've tried to make bishop f4 work when, I think Wayne Jones, he plays knight d4, he had some game with knight d4, when it seemed like there was some hope. But if black just goes this knight h5, which my computer was saying, I couldn't really find anything in any of these lines. You get some dullish positions. So I guess queen goes here. What was it? Bishop h6, rook d8. And, well, it's one of those where the computer gives 0-20, but you make some more moves and it doesn't feel like there's anything there. So I couldn't find much here, and I tried going bishop e3 instead, which leads to slightly more interesting play. I would guess black has a couple options here. Bishop e6, keeping it symmetrical, then queen to a4, and here maybe there's some hope. Once again, there's some games with knight d4. I think you were supposed to go rook ac1 for some tactical reason. I think the tactical reason was like if you go rook d1. Then this worked. So rook ac1, and I thought, yeah, there's maybe some hope here. After bishop e3, there's also other moves. b6 was interesting. It's an exchange sacrifice, stuff like this. And normally I struggle a bit evaluating such positions where we have an exchange and black has a pawn for it. My guess is it's sort of okay for black, but at least it's unbalanced and we have a nominal material advantage, so probably playable for white. What else was there? Bishop e3. Queen a5 is also a decent move. And white goes queen to b3, hinting at some queen b4 business. And here, there's different ways to play. Knight g4. I think they mainly play queen b4. When after queen b4, cb, knight d5. Once again, white is not winning, but there might be some chances. So I would probably, maybe now after I said all this, I wouldn't play it. But before this question was asked, I would probably have played dc, bishop e3 here, which I guess is the type of position that black players don't really want. But objectively, clicking, it seems like black can hold. Of course, there is the alternative to just play one of the main lines here with d5, knight a5, and now knight to d2, and you get all this very old business. How does this go? Don't quote me on the move order. All this stuff where, yeah, black has a ton of options, but I thought just e5 here was alright for black, so I'm not that keen on these lines. Even though I wouldn't be too surprised if, once the computers solve chess in whenever it's gonna be, that they say d5, good for white, d takes c5, draw. So this might be more my dislike for d5 structure speaking, but I could never, yeah, really relate to these positions, and black seems to have too many options for my taste. h5, whatever. But of course, the knight on a5 might be on the rim and dim. So this is playable, but not my cup of tea. I would try fishing in these d takes c and bishop e3 or bishop f4 waters. But not much there. I'm surprised black players don't play this more. Thanks for the question, Mr. Formless. pmarielouisjuste is saying, hello Jan, thanks for the great shows. Thank you. I'd like to know how to handle the Panov variation of the Caro-Kann with white. I heard it's quite similar to d4 openings, but still, I'm not quite sure what to do there. Thanks. I'm not sure who told you that, and I'm also not sure why you want to play the Panov variation of the Caro-Kann. It's not that popular, and it's also not that easy to play, so I'm not sure those are the hunting grounds that you want, but let's have a look at problems, or not so much of problems, but at what's going on. So e takes d, c takes d, and c4. This is called the Panov, which I'm not sure if it's very similar to d4 openings. It might be. Optically, it's sort of similar to 1 d4, d5, 2 c4, but that these pawns are missing changes the character of the position greatly, and really makes it a more open game than a closed 1 d4 game, because this bishop can develop quickly, the knight can jump to c6, the queen has a free side, and so on and so forth. So c4, black goes knight f6 more often than not, and after knight to c3, we're at the first crossroads. It's important to start with knight to c3, not with knight to f3, because then after knight f3, black is in time to go g6, bishop g7 castles, and you can't put enough pressure on the center. While after knight c3, g6, matters aren't so simple here. After cd5 or queen b3, white has some initiative. So black typically chooses between pawn to e6 and knight to c6. After pawn to e6, white goes knight to f3. Black once again chooses where to put his bishop, but by far the most popular is the move bishop to b4, and you get what they call an isolated pawns position. Do they call it? After c takes d5 or bishop to d3. Which here, white has chances for an advantage after both bishop d2 and queen to c2. But playing the Panov, you have to be used to playing with an isolated queen's pawn, which is not everybody's cup of tea. Not necessarily a bad thing. But that's one line you have to keep in mind. We have to decide between bishop to d3 and pawn takes here. Or I think there's this line with an early c5 as well, which I'm not sure is great, but it does exist if you really want to avoid IQP positions. Theoretically, the biggest roadblock for white is the move knight to c6, where white has been struggling the last couple of years, and that's why the Panov is not that common at the highest level, as far as I know. After knight f3, which looks natural, there are some very sharp direct lines with bishop to g4, c takes d5, knight takes d5, queen b3. This is all very direct. Takes, e6, takes here. This might look funky, but if you check your database, there will be literally probably thousands of games with this stuff. Queen c6, king e7. And recently there have been some new tries here, some weird stuff like queen c5 check and so on, but that's already very computerish. The usual main line is something like queen b5, queen d7, takes, knight d5, ed, this endgame. And here, black has not really been in any danger as far as I could see. It's playable for white, but black is supposed to be equal. So that's been one theoretical problem for black, for white, for a long time. And after knight f3, bishop g4, white should play quickly. If you just play quiet here with bishop e2, e6, the black pieces are doing very well, so that's not really an option. Therefore, to avoid this bishop g4, and I should mention that knight f3, g6 is also a line, but to avoid this bishop g4, they've tried putting the bishop on g5, which leads to a different type of game, when once again, black has a big choice here between d takes c4, that's one solid line, when after bishop takes c4, you can either capture the pawn or go e6, or even go h6 followed by e6. All of those are possible. Or the immediate e6, which I used to play, just, intending to go bishop e7 and then take on c4 at the right moment. Or if white goes c5, try to undermine this pawn chain with a timely b6. So I believe that's a short history of the Panov. It's too concrete and too direct an opening to talk about how should you play it, what the plans are, and so on and so forth. In general, if you're looking for a more plan-based line against the Caro-Kann, I would probably prefer bishop to d3, this, I don't know what's called, the Fischer setup, over the Panov, because here it's sort of easier to get your piece started. You want to go knight d2, knight f3, short castles, rook to e1, put the knight on e5, develop some sort of kingside attack. And the theoretical lines like bishop g4, queen b3, let's say queen d7, knight d2, intending to go here, they're all, playable without needing to know all that much or learning too many different structures. Of course, even here, things can spice up very quickly. What did we have recently was this Shankland game e5, some computer move h3. And, things got interesting very quickly. But, in general, I feel if you want a slower line, I would prefer that over the Panov. Still, I hope my little Panov survey gave you some ideas. pmarielouisjuste. Who's next? Svartsmurf. Black Smurf? He's saying, "Hi Jan, I'm considering adding the King's Indian defense to my repertoire, but via an old Indian move order to reduce white's options to hopefully only a classical or Fianchetto setup. Does white have any tricky ideas versus 5g6 or 5c6 plus 6g6 that I should know about? d4, knight f6, c4, d6, knight c3, knight bd7, e4, e5, knight f3, or 4, knight f3, c6, g3. I know about 5 bishop g5 in the ladder, but have found a setup against it." This sounds good in writing, but the fine print is the move 3 knight bd7. You're committing to knight bd7, which is a bigger concession than anything white is going to have to give up regarding lines that he maybe wanted to play. So, short answer would be, don't do it. But we've had a very, very similar question last show, so apologies if I'm repeating myself here too much. What can you do? So let's say, oops, that's, I'm not sure if this is a very pretty sight. Creepy, is it not? I meant this one. Let's say d4, knight f6, c4, d6, knight to c3, knight bd7. That's the problem. You're committing to knight bd7, which is important. E4, e5. Even if you achieve your goal, white goes knight f3, g6, bishop e2, bishop g7, castles, castles. Most white players will and should be happy with this position, because even if your main repertoire is not knight f3 and bishop e2, fighting as knight b7 is, starting the game with a big edge, because this knight, well, not a big theoretical edge, but with a big concession, because this knight can no longer exceed pressure on the center. So here, after bishop to e3, or queen to c2, or rook to e1, I believe white has excellent chances to fight for an opening advantage. And then, in terms of avoiding stuff, I'm also not so sure. Let's say your opponent is a Zamish player. Why can't he go knight e2, g6, f3 here, and play bishop e3 and get to his Zamish structures? Once again, you committed your knight to d7, where it's not ideal in all the lines. Or similarly, I'm sort of freestyling here, I'm not sure what the theory says. Play d5, and after g6 you could still go f3 if you want to play the Zamish with an early d5. And obviously you wouldn't be forced to play f3 here. There's many other moves that do come to mind. Knight f3, h3, bishop e2, bishop e3, and so on and so forth. As you've mentioned yourself, you're not stopping white from playing Fianchetto systems. Once again, all you're doing is committing to an early knight bd7 there. So what would you realistically be avoiding? Like an Averbach maybe, bishop e2, bishop g5. But even there, if I want to play with d5 and you go g6, I go bishop e2 and bishop g5, which normally you wouldn't do here because you don't need to. Like, you've already clarified the situation in the center. But I'm saying you're not scaring Averbach players with that move order. So I don't see a lot of upside, and I see a lot of downside to committing the knight so early. Therefore, my advice is don't do it. If you want to add the King's Indian, play the King's Indian straight up. This trickery, restricting white's options, all you're really doing is restricting your own options, because you shouldn't be too afraid of the 4 pawns attack. That's what you're hoping for when you play the King's Indian. And in this position, it will be to your benefit to have the option to go knight c6 or knight a6 or ed4, knock yourself out. So, best of luck, Svartsmurf. But I'm still not a fan of an early knight bd7. Also not a fan of an early c6, by the way, knight f3, c6, e4. Then you've committed to 2 things already that you might not always need. What's next? Egaustad, sorry if I mispronounced that, saying, "Hi Jan, can you recommend a smart way to play for black after the moves e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, a6, bishop a4, knight f6, castles, bishop e7, rook e1, b5, bishop b3, castles." So far, so good. That's, I think, what they call the Marshall. Castles, we only need 1 castle, so 8d3. I saw Karana use this to beat Aronian quite nicely in the latest candidates. This d3 move seemed like a nice way to stop any Marshall-like play from black. Do you know a nice setup? A lot of nices there, just saying. Against this, or do black players have to stick with the slower maneuvers, including d6, knight a5, etc.? I know you don't like questions about plans, but as a Marshall player yourself, you must have thought of this. Yeah, I've thought of this, even though the game you're referring to is it's a very particular line. So let's get to it ASAP. E4, E5, knight to F3, knight to C6, bishop B5, A6, bishop A4, knight to F6, castles, bishop E7, rook E1, B5, bishop B3, castles, D3. This is a line we've also talked about plenty in prior opening clinics. First of all, you're right, now D5 business does not really work because after takes and knight takes E5, black doesn't get enough for the pawn. So d3 in that sense does a pretty decent job of stopping any marshal related activity. However, white is making a bit of a concession by going for both rook to e1 and d3 so early. And the modern marshal player, they're used to having to play d6 in many lines. Here after a4 will also be hard to get in d5, for example. So d3 was always considered to be very harmless, because after d6, white would normally play c3, and we would play Grigorian style, where white is committed to the c3 move. And here, it's a chess game, but it's not particularly challenging. Black plays all his routine moves, knight to c6, rook e8, bishop f8, h6, bishop e6, and normally gets an equal game, even though there's still all pieces and pawns on the board. So players like Magnus Carlsen have used this line, trying to outplay their opponents with the white pieces. Still, the line you've mentioned is this very, very new line, first played by Grishuk against Aronia and then repeated by Caruana, the move bishop to d2 in this position, which pretty much has the main idea to stop this knight coming to a5 and thereby allowing black the most harmonious setup with knight a5 and pawn to c5. It's very fresh and it's very interesting. Bishop to d2 in itself is a fairly horrible move because it blocks the go-to square for our knight. So after bishop d2, this knight would really like to go here. But if black plays the move Aronian played, Aronian played in the second game against Caruana, I think in the first he played king h8, bishop to g4, then white will have to go c3 once again, pronouncing that this knight is not ideally placed in order to cover this square. So what white gained for it is that black put the bishop on g4, which more often than not is a fairly terrible square for the bishop in these structures. It will get hit by h3 sooner or later, and it does not have a lot of future on h5. So it's a trade-off. What's more of a nuisance, the bishop on g4 for black or the bishop on d2 for white? And I think that black has plenty playable lines here. One of them would be to now go for maneuvering like bishop knight a5 followed by c5, and we get this type of what's called Grigorian position, where both sides have committed some small crimes. After bishop e6, I think d4 was possible, so yeah, bishop dc, maybe was more like it, bishop e3, and we get a fresh position. It's a little slow and not up to every martial player's cup of tea, I understand that. So I thought what Aronian did would also be interesting, this d5. Did he play d5? I'm not even sure. Not sure he did. Anyway, I thought d5 was interesting, h3, pawn takes, queen takes, and now just keep grabbing space with pawn to d4, with a fairly non-standard position again. Where black, wants to go queen d6, put a rook on d8, force white to do something in the center, and white has to find a way to untangle here. I guess one approach would be to play a position like this, bishop d5, queen d6, takes, cd, ed, with a very fresh structure, where I think black is equal, but a complicated game does lie ahead. So long story short, this move bishop to d2, interesting option, but I do not expect it to be a long-term problem for black, or, well, anything that gives martial players sleepless nights, because black has so many options, especially after bishop to g4 and c3, that give him play. If white doesn't go bishop to d2, then d3 remains good old d3. It does stop you from going d5, but it's a little too passive to really give black any particular concern. And after d6, c3, knight a5, black is doing pretty alright. So thanks for the question. I hope that answered it, more or less. Noggin, he's saying, hi Jan, what do you think of this line in the Vienna? d4, d5, c4, e6, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, dc4, e4, b5. Could this be a good way to avoid the more dangerous lines, while still hoping to get 5 e3 sometimes? Yeah, I think that's a legit sideline. I'm not sure we'll make it past sideline status, but we'll talk about why and how in a minute. All right, so Vienna, knight to c3, d takes c4. Caruana recently played it against lay on, and after e4, bishop b4, bishop c4. We get some interesting theoretical debate, but as I've mentioned many times, these lines with bishop b4, bishop takes c4, they do sometimes scare me a little bit. So I'm open to alternatives in this position, and I've thought about the move b5, which, you know, doesn't get a lot of super high level outings, but it's been played by strong players like... can't think of any. But I think Duda played it against Wojciech. So yeah, people have been aware of this move for a while. I'm not quite sure it equalizes, but I do agree that it's a sideline which you can play without knowing too much theory, and if white is caught unawares, it's very likely black will get a good position. Well, even if white knows, it's not like the line is losing as far as I can tell. So the critical line is e5, knight d5, knight takes b5, and knight back to b6. Looks a bit passive, but the black scheme is easy enough. Bishop e7, short castles, knight to c6, and then see what happens. Bishop a6, knight b4, or bishop b7, knight b4. And it's up to white to, yeah, really cause trouble to this. The games haven't shown us any particularly challenging things. Normally it goes like this, bishop e3, short castles, we get this position. And here you have clicked a bit. The computer is normally quite optimistic for white. I couldn't come up with anything too threatening, but after knight to c3 back, I also wasn't really sure how black should play. It's one of those where, yeah, the computer starts giving 0-30, and then at the end of the line, more often than not, black should survive, but I wasn't sure how much fun it is. The knight is headed here, the queen often wants to go here, and then the rook to d1 or c1. Some lines knight to d2, tending to capture like this, becomes an option. So I think it's a playable line, but these positions here, after knight c3, and there's other options like queen to c1, and rook to c1, and b3, and so on and so forth, have to be checked very careful. If you are okay with those, go ahead. Have to be checked very carefully. If you're okay with those, go ahead. If not, I think one can still play it for one game. It's a bit of a surprise weapon, but it probably will not make people's main repertoire. Then I've done some clicking and stuff like here. I'm just getting some strange positions. Sorry, this might not be theoretically relevant. It's just what I was clicking at. Knight c4, knight f2. Was this the line? I think this is what I looked at. Rook f2, bishop c4, rook c1. And my computer still said white was slightly better, even though it sort of looked okay for black after c6 or whatnot. So yeah, it's one of those where the computer starts telling you you're worse, but then you click around and normally you survive, as I've said. So I do believe it's a decent sideline. I would not make it my main repertoire, but I'm not opposed to the idea of having it in the back, especially if you stumble into this position, your opponent maybe surprise you with 3 knight f3, or with 1 d4, or with whatever. And to have an alternative to your usual stuff, I think is a good idea. Therefore, yeah, not against it, but I have not spent enough time, frankly, on the position that I just showed you to have definite verdict. What else is going on? Fravatel. Wow, long essay there by Fravatel. He's saying, Grüß dich. Thanks a lot for all your excellent work. Thank you, Fravatel. I am considering switching from 1 c5 to 1 e5 because I'm getting tired of all the anti-Sicilians. And quite frankly, it is a lot of work to keep up with the main lines. Okay, everywhere, I know. I was going to give that speech. However, I am struggling with the question of what to play against the Spanish. And I had a discussion about this with some IMs at my club. They believe the Marshal is excellent at 2800 level. Wow, that's a high level. But you have to make a lot of only moves, playing black against white players who know their stuff. That has not been my experience. I have limited experience at the 2800 level, as probably do the IMs at your club. But yeah, the Marshal has served me well at my level. They also think the Briar is suspicious, although one actually plays it himself. Wow, full of contradictions, these IMs at your club. What else do they think? I'm not great at maneuvering, but I like active play. But you don't like the Marshal because there's forced lines? More contradictions, Fravatel. So I tried the Chigurin mainline. That's not very active, that's maneuvering stuff. Anyway, we'll put it on the board. And here I tried 19a3. Suspicious, but I managed to hold the draw. Wow. But it is also quite hard to equalize with black. What system would you recommend? Or just stick to the knight off and work hard on the anti-Sicilians? If you like active play and you're already playing the knight off, then I think that's not a bad place to be. I'm not sure which anti-Sicilian bothers you, but in general, I'm not aware of one that's all that horrible that will make you give up the knight off. Like 3 bishop b5 check, or what's the problem? I would, probably stick to that. And as I said, I'm not sure which anti-Sicilian is so scary. Bishop b5, knight d7, or bishop d7. I'm sure you can fix. And all the others, whatever, the Alapin or the delayed Alapin, those are cop-outs, because white doesn't know what to do against the Sicilian. So normally, if you have a good solid main weapon, like the knight off, like the marshal, then the point is that you're chasing opponents into anti-Sicilians, anti-marshals, Italians. All of those are decent lines, but you shouldn't be afraid or say I give up the opening because I play all these sidelines. That's my general stance, since you happen to already have a good opening in the knight off. But now let's get the Spanish. If you like active play, I think the marshal is a decent starting point. Of course, there is some truth to that at the highest level. It has mainly become a drawing weapon in lines like this. If white picks up the gauntlet. And this position is pretty much exclusively the marshal position they get at the highest level nowadays. And here after queen h4, g3, queen h3, whatever, the line continues another 18,000 moves. And stuff normally ends peacefully. So I understand that's not that thrilling, but from a white perspective, especially at a slightly lower level, I have like 3 out of 3 with this move. So if you play this, white has to know a bizarre amount of theory to get maybe a somewhat better endgame. Even that can be disputed here after knight f6 or knight to c7. So that's just one example. And generally, if you have a choice here between queen h4, which more or less makes a draw, or rook to e8, or queen to f6, or bishop to g6, I don't think that's a very practical choice for white, and that's pretty much the only place they go to at the highest level. So in the marshal, once again, it's more that you get sick of the sidelines. We just talked about 8d3, there's 8h4, there's 8h3, there's 6d3, and there is, of course, the Italian and the Scottish 4 knights, and all that stuff. So a lot of ground to cover there as well. I'm not sure if that's easier than the anti-Sicilians. But I don't think the marshal is not playable at below 2800 level. Because you're also always assuming that your opponents will know everything there is to know, which, in my experience, is never the case. Still, active Spanish openings. I also have a bit of a soft spot for this stuff, which I play quite regularly. And it's also very active. Doesn't lead to so much maneuvering. This, would always be high on my list of choices as an active player. You can watch Peter Svidler's excellent video series, play the Arkhangelsk, or whatever it's called, from the black perspective here. What else was there? You gave us this long line in the Chigurin, where, I guess I agree. I'm not a big student of the Chigurin. Knight c6, knight b3, a5, a4. This, I think, is close to equality and it's playable, but probably it won't strike fear in most white players' hearts. Knight f1. I forgot what your line was. Rook f e8, I believe. There's also this plan with rook c8, bishop d8, bishop b6 maybe. But as I said, I'm not a big expert here. And these positions, playable for black, but I do agree that white is probably slightly better. And they do require a bit of maneuvering skill. So, Chigurin wouldn't be my first choice either. Long rambling answer. Play the knight off, don't be afraid of the sidelines. In e4, e5 as an active player. I think the marshal is fine. I think whatever the other line is called, the Arkhangelsk is fine. But those are the ones I'm playing, so it might be. biased. Then again, everyone's biased. Yeah, I think that's all I got. I have one clever point to make, but no. Can't think of it. Best of luck. Fravatel. Don't play the Chigurine. Sorry, Chigurine heads out there. NicolPasini is saying, hello Jan, I'm rated around 2200. And as white I usually play the dumb-looking Jobava pre-attack. d4, knight f6, knight c3, d5, bishop f4. Does look a little dumb, doesn't it? The problem is that if black wants, he can make you play a French defense by going 2e6, e4, d5. That's the problem. I used to play bishop g5 here, but the lines after d, e94 and knight b7 always seemed a bit dry. Do you have any suggestion on lines after d, e4 to get a little edge? My other openings as black, if this may help you to answer the questions, are Grunfeld and Botvinnik on 1 d4 and 1 e5, or Najdorf on 1 e4. Wow, you're like an evolved fravatel who already plays the Najdorf and 1 e5. Thanks for your time and for the amazing commentaries you and Peter do. Thank you, thank you. So NicolPasini, you're saying I play sharp mainlines with black, and with white I enjoy doing nonsense, but sometimes they don't allow me to play my nonsense, and then I get very upset. Am I understanding that correctly? So what you're hoping for is d4, knight f6, knight c3, d5, bishop f4. And here, normally all the bishop f4 players I know, all they really want is to have somebody fall for this knight bd7, knight b5 trick once. That is their main plan. Anyway, we're not here to talk you out of this because it makes you happy. And your problem is 2e6 when you're saying, now I have to go e4 because if I go bishop f4, then they won't play d5, they will play bishop b4. And if I play e3 now, they will play knight d5 and I'm already worse and I don't like it. At least I'm assuming that's your line of reasoning. So you go e4, which looks correct, occupying the center, and after d5, we're back to the French. First of all, not everybody plays the French, so it will be a small subset of your opponents who see that you exclusively play d4, knight c3, bishop f4, who think, okay, I must try to transpose to the mainline French against that. And once they do, you've asked about bishop g5, d takes e4. Of course, there's many moves here, bishop e7, bishop b4, d takes e4, knight e4, here there's bishop e7 as well. And now knight bd7, which here, I don't disagree, is a solid line for black. I think it's important, or obviously there's two main moves here, knight to f3 and knight takes f6. But to my mind it makes sense to start with knight takes f6. The point being that if you start with knight f3, now black goes bishop e7, and he can always meet knight f6 with bishop takes f6, which, as far as I can tell, is a pretty decent line. Very solid, and more pieces disappear. So in order to avoid this bishop coming here, I would take on f6 first, and after knight takes f6, now develop the knight to f3. When, yeah, as someone who's never played e4 or the French, I can't claim a lot of expertise here, but it looks like a better position you would get than out of your d4, knight c3, bishop f4, no? If they go h6 here, which is one of the main moves, I think you can play this position against the bishops, but bishop b5 check is important, restricting this guy further, and after c6, bishop d3, I do believe that white is a little better. Queen to e2, along castles, knight to e5. This guy is a little passive, so I think that's a reasonable line to play without knowing so much, and you don't have to learn this more theoretical thing. What else is there? If they go, what can they do? If they go bishop e7, I guess you just develop now. Bishop to d3. Once again, seems a little nicer for white, no? Castles, queen to e2, c5, white normally takes on these lines. Then long castle is often coming. I take white. And yeah, they do something like this. I also think white's a little better. c3, queen c5. Here, it's often a decent idea. Transfer this bishop here. And queen e2, short castles. So, not winning. As I said, it's a solid line. And black hasn't done anything particularly wrong except for 2e6 instead of 2d5. But I do not think that should discourage you from going... That sentence is sounding weird. That shouldn't discourage you from going 2 knight c3, d5, bishop f4. Because after e6, e4, d5, bishop g5, de, you know, might have some chances for a small edge indeed. So, best of luck on your voyage, NicolPasini. Last question? Now let's do... How many more? Let's do some more. Where were we? Assassin in White is saying, "Hey Jan, thanks for your continuous good work. Thank you. My greatest ability is availability. What is the current theoretical state of the line c4, knight f6, knight c3, e6, e4, c5? How practical is it? And why is it less popular than 3d5? For example, we'll put on the board limit. Long line looks equal for black. Yeah, let's find the board and see. So after e6, e4, yeah, I'm team d5 here, because I think this is, yeah, in decent shape for black these days. And I also like it a bit better objectively than c5, when the critical move, as you've mentioned, is this e5. There's also these lines with knight f3, knight c6, bishop e2, but they're not really. Yeah. A serious try for an opening advantage. So e5, knight to g8, knight f3. White is more or less forced, in order to fight for an opening advantage, to go for this pawn sacrifice. And I think you hit it right on the head, that line that you gave, the long line. How does this go? Queen to b4, knight c6. This is what they're doing. There's alternatives along the way. Instead of queen b4, there's other moves, queen c5 and bishop d8. Here instead of queen e7, there's d6. But yeah, I do think this is what they have been doing. No? Or am I mixing something up? No, queen e7. And here, it was a little more critical to take instead of... What did you give? I think castles. Then takes and d6, which I agree, seems to equalize. I thought it was a little more challenging to take yourself. When king takes e7, long castle, it's a surprisingly difficult position for black to play. So I guess the theoretically challenging way is something like knight f e7, long castle, d5, trying to give the pawn back. And here I'm not sure white has an advantage, but he can try some stuff like bishop e2 or maybe the direct f4. I looked at something like bishop e2 takes, bishop d7, and it felt a little shaky from black's perspective. Knight e4, you have to go knight to c8, bishop e3, bishop a4, c7 also an option. Felt like more than full compensation, even though the computer, as he does, will normally hold. He was giving whatever, knight a5, and there were some funky lines, starting with rook takes d7 here, while bishop to d3 or bishop to e2, but mainly bishop d3 are also possibilities. So I guess that's a little more testing, but nothing that can't be solved with a bit of homework. So if you want to play c5 and you're comfortable getting these positions, I would not advise against it, but yeah, from a theoretical perspective, that's the best I know of for white at the very least. Queen c5, d6, queen a5 is some old Kasparov line, but that didn't seem that challenging. So yeah, I got nothing better than this, and here I don't doubt that black can equalize, but I would guess it won't be so much fun, which is why most players play 3d5. I could be wrong, and there could be something I don't know about this, but as I said, that's according to the best of my knowledge the biggest question that one can ask here. Queen takes e7 and try to create some problems. Thanks for the question, Assassin in White. CR1 M3. I should be able to decode that name, but I still can't do it. Is it Cristiano Ronaldo? No, he's CR7, no? He's saying, hi Jan, in the variation e4, c5, knight f3, d6, bishop b5, most sources give bishop t7 as a safe equalizer. I never trust sources. These anonymous sources, we don't trust them. And nowadays at the highest level, knight d7, more popular than bishop d7. Still, but after bishop d7, queen d7, 5 c4, I think Van Kampen gives in his video series good ways to press with white for an advantage against black g6 setups. Then one look at the engine tells me that 5 e5 is according to them equal. However, when I looked at it, I saw a nearly symmetrical position in which the main difference is that white's bishop is a good bishop and black's bishop is a bad bishop. Now my question, is the evaluation of the engine right in the blocked center, which should lead, after the development, to flank attacks, leads to equality, and the white bishop is only optically superior, but in reality, not I guess, or are the engines wrong? But not in reality. Or are the engines wrong because they fail to calculate the long-term factors, like good bishop white, bad ones black, and white has a slight edge? Thank you for your answer, CRM3. That's an interesting question. Once again, I do not really have answers. I'm with you that if you look at these positions, we get here. As I said, knight d7. Nowadays, very en vogue. But if you look at such positions with a computer, it will normally say, what's the problem? But if you look at it through human eyes, you see the bad bishop and you're picturizing nightmare scenarios where white has a knight on d5 against the idiot bishop on e7 or g7 and you lose. So I do believe there is, these sort of general thoughts are a big reason why these lines are seldom played for black, but I don't think it's a bad setup, so I'm torn. Mainly I think my chess understanding is not good enough to answer that question. Realistically, because I have this deeply rooted fear of having a knight sit here and not getting it out of the way. But clearly, I can't prove that move by move. And after knight c, let's make some moves. Knight c3, knight c6, d3. It seems like black even has two reasonably playable setups. Magnus once played bishop e7, followed by bishop to d8 against Bacro immediately. Getting this bishop out of the way and addressing maybe a possible departure. Then the knight goes to e7, black castled. And, Magnus, being Magnus, he had absolutely no problems in that game. And made some random moves, a3, knight g7, b4. But the computer says, you know what, knock yourself out. I'm not scared. Still, I would guess white has to be somewhat better here. So that's one plan. And the other is to just Fianchetto, go g6, tending bishop g7, knight g7, short castles, f5, which I also couldn't crack. Normally they play something over here. Once again, this pawn sacrifice, or often it's best to ignore it before throwing b6 at some point. In such a position, it's not clear what the great white bishop is doing, because as long as it can't be exchanged for a knight and bishop g5 we would probably meet with f6. Then this bishop does not really have a great role being blocked by the black pawn chain everywhere. Well, black does have the counterplay with f5 at a convenient moment. So while white's position looks nicer, I didn't really understand what to do. Well, with black, I have plans. So it's an intriguing line, and I don't know, I would probably need some practice against stronger players than me, because I'm not even, or against better strategicians than me, because I'm very much a move-by-move player, and I struggle with such long-term questions as well. So my guess is engines are smart, they're right, this is playable. But I also think that humanly, even if you sort of agree that it's playable, it's gonna be tricky to play. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's smart to throw in a quick h4 here, for example. I'm not sure, I don't understand the subtleties well enough. Trying to provoke h5 when it makes it harder to go f5 in the distant future. Well, if you go h6, you always have to wonder, do I really want to put another pawn on the dark square? So there's a lot of strategy that goes into it. Maybe this g6, h4 is the reason why Magnus prefers bishop e7, bishop d8. I do not understand. I believe it's a solution that you can play without having to look at much theory. Because the center is blocked, we get the pieces out, and then the maneuvering starts. But I would need either more practice of my own or study more games in this line, which I don't think these games exist, to come to a more qualified verdict. For now, it's a confusing line, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's just fine for black. So it's an interesting point. By CR1M3. Thanks for the question, and sorry for the rambling answer. All right, last one for today's show, because I'm gonna need some more coffee before getting into the bishop g5 Najdorf. So we will end with crispyambulance, who's saying Jan, super openings man. That's what they call me. Back in the day, John Nunn recommended meeting the Taimanov with 5 knight b5, as this was a logical response to missing out a6. That's a strange logic, is it not? Knight b5 is logical since you didn't go a6. Anyway, we'll get to it later. It often seems to turn into a headshot type position, but it seems that white has all the play. He can just do nothing and draw easily. Once again, I'm not so sure about that claim. I've never seen it happen. White just moves around and draws easily. Or use the extra space advantage to adjust his pieces for the best possible attacking formation. However, this seems to have faded from view in favor of 5 knight c3 lines. Was there a particular game or setup that caused this, or do white players just prefer a concrete position rather than the more strategic hedgehog approach? Many thanks. There might be that, but I think it's not a particularly great version of the hedgehog you get in the line that I'm assuming we're talking about. So let's put on the board. This is the good old Taimanov knight to c6, and you've argued that knight b5 is logical because black hasn't played a6. Then again, knight c3 is also quite logical because we should develop pieces and not move them all at once. So knight b5 gives black a choice. You can now transpose to the pelican, which most people don't, but it's a theoretically sound opening. And with white you have to keep that in mind. Knight f6, you have to go knight c3, d6. Well, there's nothing better than bishop f4, e5, bishop g5. And all of a sudden we are in the pelican, or Sveshnikov, as we call it in Europe. In Europe? In Germany? So yeah, you gotta keep that in mind. But the line you were talking about, I'm guessing, is knight b5, d6 to avoid getting this check. Pawn to c4, knight to f6, knight 1 to c3, pawn to a6. And here, knight a3 is the traditional main line, even though recently I've seen some people dabble with knight to d4. But I guess black equalizes with a timely d5 here as well. So knight to a3 is what they normally do in order to stop black from going d5 for now. d5 is his old Kasparov gambit, but I don't like it. However, I don't think this is such a bad version of the hedgehog as you kept implying, because white has lost some time putting his knight on a not great square. So it will take a while for white to get his best possible setup here. Well, black, you know, the knight on c6 is not ideal, so often it will get reshuffled to e7. But I do believe that this is a fairly decent version of events for black. And I don't agree with the notion that white can just move around and do nothing and easily draw one day or another after black gets all his pieces out. Normally, there are some breaks or some ways for black to sharpen the position up. So just do nothing. It does not strike me as easy here. From a theoretical perspective, I used to play knight to e5 here after bishop e3, just trying to regroup the knight, put it on d7, and then bishop to b7. But I learned from Robin van Kampen's excellent video series that there is the even smarter way to play here, bishop to b7, which I used to not play because of queen b3 when I thought knight d7 was forced. But Robin taught me that after bishop b7, queen b3, we can still play knight e5, counterattack against this pawn. And after bishop b6, queen to d7. Black is on time. So, like, let's say f3 here, rook fb8. White does not manage to keep his extra material without running into trouble. So theoretically, I think this bishop b7 is important, because I thought it was not great due to queen b3. But since I learned that, and now after f3, you can just go knight e7 and argue. All your pieces are misplaced. Why should I worry? Well, I have 1,000 useful hedgehog moves to make. Queen c7, rook c8, rook e8, queen b8, bishop d8, bishop c7, d5 at the right moment. If I run out of ideas, there's always the Fischer plan, king h8, rook g8, g5, sometimes h5, h4 is a top pick. So disagree that white can just move around and do nothing and make an easy draw. I've never seen that happen. Yeah, I'm not sure. I made a convincing argument. Knight b5, certainly a playable move. It's not like it's all of a sudden bad. But I do believe that there are reasons why white players are looking for an opening advantage in these lines more than in 5 knight to b5. Still, if you want to do it and you're more of a strategic player and you don't mind facing the Sveshnikov, then I do not think knight b5 is a horrible line. There's also this line, d6, bishop f4, which I don't think is considered to be critical from an opening theory standpoint, but it always annoyed me slightly because I have to play with these light square weaknesses, which is not my style. So stylistically, you might catch someone a little off guard with stuff like that, but from a computer perspective, I think knight b5 is less of a challenge than knight to c3. So I hope, Crispy Ambulance, that answer your question, at least to some extent. That's it for today, for our season opener of Jan's Opening Clinic, Season 20. Apologies for the sleepy presentation. I blame my daughter. She's waking up at 5:30 these days, which really is not a time to wake up. I have to think of solutions, like, I don't know what to do. Maybe I'll make her watch Silence of the Lambs or something today before falling asleep. Then let's see if you get up at 5:30. She's almost 2, so she should be ready for movies like that. You gotta start cultural education at some point. Anyway, thank you guys for watching this exciting show. We'll be back with a well-rested me next Thursday, 5 p.m. Hope you liked it. See you next time. Bye.